The sun blazed over the rugged plains, casting long shadows across the dusty trails as the lone rancher, Samuel Hayes, rode into the small, nearly abandoned town of Red Rock. He was a man of few words, with the kind of steely eyes that had seen more than any man should, and a reputation for surviving situations where others had fallen. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the sight that awaited him at the edge of the canyon. A giant Apache woman, taller and stronger than any he had ever encountered, standing like a sentinel, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and something unspoken, something dangerous. Her name was Aylen, a warrior of her people, who had lived her life defending her tribe from threats, both within and beyond their lands. Rumors had traveled fast through Red Rock of her fierceness, and now Samuel felt that same rumor staring him down, daring him to step closer. Their meeting was electric, charged with tension that went beyond the mere presence of two strangers. Samuel's hand hovered near his revolver, but he knew that this confrontation was not one that could be solved with a bullet. Aylen's gaze held a challenge, an invitation, and perhaps a warning. As the wind swept across the canyon, it carried whispers of old feuds and new alliances, stories of survival, strength, and survival of the fittest in a land where law was often just a suggestion. As they circled each other, careful and measured, Samuel noticed the meticulous control in her movements, the way she seemed to dominate the space around her without needing to make a single sound. And yet, in her silence, there was a voice loud enough to make him rethink every decision that had brought him here. They were alone, but surrounded by the echoes of the past, the remnants of battles, lost families, and the endless struggle between settlers and the Apache. The town itself seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that something monumental was about to unfold. And in that suspended moment, Samuel realized that his life, and perhaps his destiny, was about to intertwine with a force far greater than he had ever imagined. Night fell over the desert, and the stars reflected off the rugged terrain, illuminating the tense standoff between Samuel and Aylen. Around them, the coyote calls echoed through the canyon, blending with the distant sounds of a windmill creaking in the empty town. Samuel felt a strange respect for this formidable woman who had so easily matched his instincts, who had not flinched when danger presented itself, and whose eyes revealed intelligence, pride, and a depth of experience that could not be underestimated. In the quiet of the night, under the watchful gaze of the moon, they began to understand each other, not through words, but through glances, gestures, and the unspoken acknowledgement of skill and courage. Aylen, despite her size and fearsome reputation, carried an aura of vulnerability that Samuel could sense, an untold story that lingered behind her steady gaze. As they shared that tense silence, the harshness of the West seemed to melt away, replaced by a fragile but undeniable connection, a bond formed in a crucible of survival and trust. The challenges of the land, the dangers of rival factions, and the unyielding demands of life on the frontier had forged them both into survivors. Yet in each other, they found the potential for something different, perhaps companionship, understanding, or even a fragile alliance. But the night was far from safe. Threats lurked in the darkness, and the choices they made in these hours could shape the future of the surrounding lands, for both settlers and Apache alike. As dawn approached, the tension eased slightly, replaced by cautious curiosity, a tentative respect, and the sense that this encounter was just the beginning of an extraordinary story. Their fates were entwined now, and the journey ahead would test their strength, courage, and hearts in ways neither could anticipate, all set against the unforgiving, beautiful, and wild backdrop of the American frontier. The morning sun barely pierced the dense haze of dust that hung over Red Rock, casting long shadows across the broken buildings and dry riverbeds. Samuel rode cautiously along the canyon's edge, his senses on high alert, knowing that Aylen's presence was both a threat and a strange kind of protection. The previous night had left their uneasy alliance forged in the heat of survival, Yet Samuel could feel that trust was fragile, easily shattered by the harsh realities of the West. Aylen's giant frame emerged from the shadows, moving with an almost predatory grace, her eyes scanning the horizon as if reading the land itself. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low but commanding, carrying the weight of authority that Samuel had learned to respect. Their journey led them to the abandoned mining camp, where whispers of bandit activity had reached Aylen's ears, and Samuel knew that whatever awaited them there would test both their strength and cunning. As they approached, the distant sound of hooves and the glint of metal reminded Samuel that danger lurked closer than they had hoped. Bandits had been raiding settlers along the trade routes, and these men were ruthless, thinking they could exploit the land and its people without consequence. Samuel and Aylen moved silently through the tall brush, each step deliberate, their eyes locked on the shadows that might conceal their enemies. Aylen's strategic mind was apparent as she silently pointed out vantage points and weak spots in the terrain, and Samuel realized that her reputation was not just legend, it was earned through blood, sweat, and survival. The confrontation began before they had fully reached the camp. Arrows whistled past, forcing Samuel to dive behind a fallen boulder, while Aylen's strength allowed her to intercept another with astonishing speed. The battle was chaotic, brutal, yet precise, with every movement a calculated risk, every decision a matter of life and death. Samuel fired carefully, each shot measured, trusting Aylen's guidance, and together they dismantled the first wave of attackers with a combination of courage, skill, and instinct that left even the most hardened bandits shaken. When the dust settled, the camp was silent except for the labored breaths of the survivors and the distant cawing of a lone raven. Samuel glanced at Aylen, noticing for the first time the faint traces of fatigue on her face, the toll of battle etched into her massive frame. Yet there was no hesitation in her eyes, only resolve. In that moment, Samuel understood that their connection had grown beyond mere survival. It was mutual respect, admiration, and an unspoken bond forged in the fire of shared trials. They spent the remainder of the day securing the area, tending to minor injuries and gathering supplies, aware that the bandits would regroup if given the chance. As night fell, they set up camp beneath a cliff that offered both protection and a vantage point over the surrounding plains, sharing a quiet understanding that this was only one battle in a war for survival and justice in the Wild West. The stars above reflected the vastness of their world, and Samuel felt a rare sense of clarity. He had found an ally in Aylen, a force of nature as untamed and strong as the land itself, and together they would face whatever came next, knowing that the frontier was unforgiving, but that together they could carve their own path through it. The desert night was alive with whispers of danger as Samuel and Aylen rode silently along the ridge, their eyes fixed on the distant flicker of torchlight marking the bandits' hidden camp. Every step brought tension, every shadow a potential threat, yet their trust in each other had grown beyond words. Aylen moved with a fluid precision, signaling Samuel to take cover behind jagged rocks, and together they devised a plan to strike before the bandits realized they were being watched. The first shots rang out, shattering the stillness, and chaos erupted as Samuel's quick aim and Aylen's immense strength turned the tide. Against their enemies, dust and smoke mingled with the cries of retreating bandits, but the fight was far from over. As dawn approached, the first light revealed the ravaged camp and the uneasy survivors, and Samuel knew their path ahead would remain perilous. Yet beneath the tension a quiet bond had formed, a mutual respect forged in danger, trust, and the unyielding spirit of the frontier. Together they would face whatever came next, determined to survive and carve justice into the harsh lands they called home.